Welcome to the Empowered to Connect podcast, where we come together to discuss a healing-centered approach to engagement and well-being for ourselves, our families, and our communities. I'm JD Wilson, and I am your host. And today on the show, we've got Lucinda Miles from Volunteers for Youth Justice down in Shreveport, Louisiana. Lucinda is working on some unbelievable projects related to getting TBRI into prisons, TBRI into the juvenile justice system, and their organization, Volunteers for Youth Justice, has made massive strides in Shreveport. We're going to tell you all about it later on. Full disclosure, as you can hear now, I've got a little bit of a sinus infection, and so my voice might sound a little bit different, a little bit under the weather. That's because I am. Feel great, sound terrible. But we are going to talk with Lucinda now, and you're just going to love her. It's a great, great interview. Here she is now, the electric Lucinda Miles. Well, all right, we're here with Lucinda Miles, and Lucinda works for Volunteers for Youth Justice in Louisiana. And Lucinda, we're going to talk about a lot of the work that you do, but for anybody that doesn't know who you are, why don't you just give us a brief background of kind of who you are and what brought you into this line of work?
Thank you, JD. I'm so excited to be here today and having an opportunity for this conversation. I began with Volunteers for Youth Justice roughly a decade ago. And I came on as more of a kind of a gap filler, to be real. I was working on becoming a life coach, or I was a life coach, and thought, well, I'll do something part-time. And oh my goodness, did that ever change the trajectory of my life? I came on board with, again, Volunteers for Youth Justice has been around since the early 1980s, and we are growing exponentially. I came on board, we had about 24 on staff, and now we have close to 60. So wow. With many, we meet the need, and that's where our population of staff members have grown because the need is so huge. And so when I began, I actually was a CASA, court-appointed special advocate trainer, recruiter. I did change a lot of hats over the years. And Kelly Todd, our amazing executive director, says that, wow, Lucinda, you probably worn more hats than most of us in our organization, because I just have so much fun, to tell you the truth, with everything I do with VYJ. I love it. I love serving the families. I love serving the children. So until about 2018, really, or shortly before that, if I could lay a little framework, Volunteers for Youth Justice is closely connected with the Caddo Juvenile Court, where we have, of course, we have CASAs, we have FINS, Families in Need of Services. This is also under the umbrella of Volunteers for Youth Justice. And we work among the court with the judges, but the judge we were most closely, I think, carried the torch for everything VYJ does is Judge David Matlock, our chief judge, who's about to retire, actually, in just a few weeks. But an amazing torchbearer for everything about child welfare and TBRI. He's the greatest TBRI cheerleader, I think, on the planet. But to go back momentarily, in a 2016, 17-ish, Judge Matlock began to dive into trauma and how he was seeing families come back into court. And just, I would hear him look out in the court and he goes, I believe you were in my court previously. And it might have been a grandmother who was there with her child years ago. And he was seeing that generational trauma and the impact it was having on our community. And frankly, just globally, it's having such a huge effect of that. We are not just seeing the child in the courtroom. We are seeing the generations that came before that child. And that something needed to happen to throw a wrench in this cycle. So Judge Matlock began to have these bench conferences with CASAs, attorneys, others that were directly associated with the system. But most importantly, he had those conversations with the parents themselves. And he would ask them just a question that some of them had never been asked before. Tell me, were you ever abused? And many of them, I think he would probably say 99.9% of them, that was the case. And he had parents that just said, nobody's ever asked me that.
Yeah.
Even though I'm in counseling, I might have just checked boxes where it said, were you ever abused? And maybe out of shame or whatever would come in. So that was laying a lot of the foundation for, in 2018, April of 2018, the first group of folks, I was fortunate and blessed to be one of those, went to the TBRI Practitioner training in New Orleans. It was the first time the KPICD ever held it off campus, actually. It was sort of a pivotal moment in their history also. And I went along with about 5 others, no, maybe 6 others in our community, all of which none were associated with Volunteers for Youth Justice. So the day after I got back from practitioner training, Judge Matlock is sitting in the office at Volunteers for Youth Justice, and I'm sitting there just fresh from that moment of having an amazing week, just excited as I could be. And I could sense that Judge Matlock wanted every person, every human being that came through his courtroom, and he hears basically all the child in need of care cases in Caddo Parish.
Right.
And that's a big number. And he wanted every parent, everybody to know about TBRI. And it seemed daunting because for those who have been through the practitioner training, it's a lot of information. And if you want to get the message out in an effectual way, you need others to have, as I like to say, have drunk a lot of Kool-Aid on TBRI. They need to know about it. And at the time, I still look back and we had to smile over the fact it was just like, okay, here's a connected child book and here's a TBRI pocket guide and go in peace. Do what you can. And so at that point, and this was about late April, I became a practitioner in April of 18, and this was about mid-May when I realized that Judge needed this message to go out, and the whole world needs it to go out. So Judge Matlock and Kelly Todd, our ED, we realized that if we could have a group of folks, much like CASAs, they've been vetted, they've been trained, and they would be TBRI advocates. We could get them commissioned in front of the judge. They could be assigned a case, much like CASA, but our TBRI advocates work with a caregiver who is taking care of the child. It could be the bio parent, but it could be a foster parent, a fictive kin. And they take it's called the Roadmap to Family Empowerment. It's a 10-week session curriculum that they are helping that caregiver learn these strategies, learn how trauma has impacted the brain. And so when your baby child that you have is having that meltdown, this is what we do. So that was a big program to launch when, as Kelly would say, she would say, Lucinda, we don't have dollars for this, but we're going to make it work. And we did. Yeah. And so we have that program. And things, JD, just began to grow out of an immense need. Yeah. We realized it'll be October 3 years ago that we started the TBRI caregiver training for biological family members, or it could be a grandmother, someone that's caring, but not DCFS, not foster parents. And every Tuesday, Thursday, from 5 to 6:30 by Zoom, we go through the entire 24 hours of caregiver training.
Man. And
wow, I can promise one thing. I've learned TBRI, at least that caregiver package, inside and out, because I see that if we are able to empower the families, and most especially reunification is a goal, but just period, to empower those families with these life-changing strategies, we are doing a step into throwing that wrench into the generational trauma.
That's awesome. Okay, I have 1,000 questions. First, I'd say give us kind of so VYJ has been around for a long time, right?
Correct.
So almost 40 something years, 45 years maybe. somewhere in that neighborhood. So been around for a long time, and kind of what prior to 2016, prior to Judge Matlock getting involved and a lot of this accelerating, what was the work of UIJ and how was it operating on in the community?
We began with a group of ladies that are individuals. I think it was mostly ladies that went to a conference out of state. This was in 1983-ish, 4-ish, and went to this conference and realized that our city, Shreveport, needed to fill a lot of gaps. We had a lot of families in need. So they came back to Shreveport and started, it was called Juvenile Justice at the time. And we are still our core admin, Kelly Todd, executive offices are in the First Presbyterian Church there in Shreveport. And I'll be happy to share if also about the harbor and some places where it's grown. But
Yes.
When we started, our mission was to be a community, an organization that met families and children in crisis.
Okay.
And programs emerged. We didn't start with the programs that we, of course, have today, but we out in the community, we offer youth mentoring. We're in schools. We have tribal court where youth are able to be their own court, and they are able to be the judge, the bailiffs, all the people that participate in court, and they get to be those that judge their friends, so to speak, that have just some minor infractions, maybe been disrespectful in the classroom, and et cetera. So we do a lot of work proactively to help kiddos. Then we have conflict resolution, where when a child we receive calls and they've had an infraction at school, they come and do a class in the morning. And if they've been suspended from school, then they are able to bring a parent in, let them see how all of this happened in the school. And then they are able to receive a certificate and go back to school. Because we know if a kid's kept out of school, what's happening scholastically. We also now have a program, our TASK program, which is a truancy program for K through 5th grade. We know we have got to address the issues of truancy very early on in order to help that child have that routine going to school. We also offer other intervention, power of choice, stop out shoplifting, things that help do, I think, life value moments for kiddos. And we reach and make way to meet those needs. And people are always calling, and I think calling Kelly Todd and saying, we need you to take this on. Could VYJ do this? And could VYJ do that? Yeah.
So all of these kind of rooted in helping to maybe eliminate crime cycles in Shreveport, right? Kind of that's sort of the target of the work.
I would say, yes, absolutely. That is one of the work that we do. But we also are recognizing that so many of our families are living at poverty level or below, and their challenges are just enormous. And we, through kind of leading that a segue into the harbor, which is getting ready to have its grand opening next month, which it's a 55,000 square foot facility that Kelly envisioned this in 2016. And we called it for years a one-stop shop until it actually turned into a reality. And it's been named the Harbor. Families can walk in off the streets. They can be assigned from the court. We're not going to turn any family away, where they can come into this building and they can have services all in one spot. We're near the bus stop, so they don't have to worry about transportation. We're going to do assessments. We're going to be able to track it. We're going to have an amazing calming studio in there, which we are replicating in many different places. So VYJ, I just can't say enough about the amazing organization, how fortunate I am to be a part of this journey over at least the last 10 years, to watch us show up we show up. And when there's a need, we are going to do our best to meet the need. And I would, in again, 2018 practitioner training. Then we had bio parent training or advocate program training that evolved. I think I'm doing a Jack and the Beanstalk now, because out came the advocate program, then out came the bio parent training. In January of this year, I went to Fort Collins, Colorado, and they actually, I went there to train the advocate program, and they are also implementing the bio parent training. So we are replicating ourselves in those important areas. And then in April of last year, we began training the inmates at Caddo Correctional Center. So I'm going to catch a breath there and leave pause there. And I love sharing that. Yes.
Okay. So I want to talk more about that. I want to talk more about the harbor in a second. Give people a background of you. I mean, you shared before we started recording today, you used to be a radio DJ at one point. So how did you even get, are you from Shreveport? How did you get into this work initially? What was your background, Lucinda?
I have really, JD, it's pretty fun. It would be kind of like, what's my line? And I could go on there and say something. Everybody go, that probably wasn't you, but it probably was. So I am from South Arkansas. I'm a native, I guess, of Arkansas, and lived in many different places in that state. And about 2008, I moved to Shreveport by way of quite an incredible life adventure. I'll be happy to lead that into that, because, life takes us on a lot of journeys. And I just encourage folks to have fun with every journey, because you never know when that journey is going to put you right in the mainstream of where you're supposed to be for the rest of your life. And I never thought I would probably be living in Shreveport. I had a fun business. I lived in an RV for almost 8 years. I had a mobile rock climbing wall and a shaved ice unit, and traveled, lived the winters in Miami and traveled up north in the summer, and had fun with kids and adults. And that was a little bit about what got me to Shreveport. So as I say, I can't change that into another reason. I came here because I knew there was a wealth of, trauma, and I needed to go into that. Sure. Absolutely not. It was another journey of my life that put me smack dab in the middle of Shreveport, Louisiana, and began the journey of where I am today. And it's fun to go out back and tell those stories, because many of the other stories and adventures in my life have been very important to how I show up in the world today, and helping kids up a rock climbing wall. I saw victory. I saw kids that look back and they'd say, "Oh, you're back again this year. Let me see if I can get a little further." So I kind of got to be a TBRI person then, even though I didn't know anything about it. And when I went on board with VYJ, it really quickly defined itself as a place I was very passionate about. Yeah. Passionate about our children, passionate about families that are struggling. Children are struggling because their parents are struggling. And I want to be a game changer for empowering families, and realizing I love training TBRI to every population I can get before. But however, when I started training the bio parents, this light bulb went off, and I thought, this is grassroots. If we can help change the lives of those biological family members or fictive care, if we can do that, I don't ever want to stop that moment. That's why I'm saying we train that every week, every Tuesday, Thursday. And when every opportunity has presented itself, and I've had that chance to share about our community and about TBRI. Yesterday, I went to the FINS conference. I was a presenter at our Families in Need of Services conference, and that was basically sharing about TBRI in the courts and what does that look like. And when they say, oh, you'll have about an hour and 15 minutes, I think, wow, that's a long time. And then I get up there and I start talking about it. And I think, could I have 2 hours and 15 minutes? Because there's just so much to share. Yeah.
So you jump into VYJ and you're beginning to work there and you're beginning to see that effect of like, oh, this is the real special sauce here, is like getting to families and getting the information in caregivers' hands, because then, hopefully it begins to lessen the cycles with their kids, which will then lessen cycles with their kids generationally, on and on. So, you and I were talking, we were all of our KPICD ambassador organizations were at TCU recently, and we were all talking, and you just casually mentioned doing TBRI training for incarcerated parents. And I was like, hold on now, wait a minute, stop. I need to know more about this. So why don't you begin kind of just sharing about that and how that opportunity came up and how that has gone so far?
And this is where, I think if we had 3 hours in a podcast, I could so roll this, because my heart is just there. And in April, again, we actually started and wanted to start it prior to COVID. Judge Matlock and some other individuals from the court and Kelly Todd and I went to our Caddo Correctional Center, our jail, and it's a large jail. I do want to add that, a lot of inmates. And to speak about how maybe we could bring this training. We didn't know how, and we were going to start only with the women. And this was pre-COVID. And first we had a lot of logistics, what room are we going to do it in? Because it could not be done by Zoom. It had to be in person. Yeah. And we toured this room. I can still see us doing it. This is, like I say, this is several years ago. And it was a very small room. Judge Matlock and the whole crew said, let's start with about 7 ladies. And I said, sure, wherever we can start, this will be good. Because I had mentioned to Judge Matlock at the time, and I was pretty much the sole trainer. But I said, Judge, and he was all on board. Again, Judge Matlock said, wow, what a place to bring this message. So then COVID stopped that ball from rolling. And then on the other side of COVID, we had a few false starts when we thought we were on our way. But here's the good news about it, and what I'm so grateful for. We started with about 30 women. They upped it, and we were only going to get to do 7. So we have these 30 women, and that started last April. And the stories from these women it just lights me up to have one of the ladies come and say, I want you to know that this might sound silly, but I share TBRI with my cellmate all the time. And I told her the other day that if I had to come to jail to hear about TBRI, I would have come for that. Yeah. That rocked my world. Yeah. It rocked it. And she said, because I would not have been exposed to TBRI out in the world where I would typically be. And to hear these stories, and it has turned into a success story with the women. And in November, those at the jail came and asked me if we would consider training the men. And I, of course, yes, I said absolutely 100%. Right. But if I might add, I was a little, for those of you who are familiar with that are listening to the podcast, that are familiar with the TBRI caregiver training, of course, it's got the videos with the children and very much focused on the camps and how that was looking. And I thought, I wonder how the men are going to respond to this. So I thought, but we're going to see. We'll see how it rolls. Oh, I'm just telling you, JD, we had over in the very first rollout, which we're still in that first rollout, but the very first session, we had over 100 men in there. Wow. And we have a picture. If I have your cell phone, I think I do, I can text it to you. They took a picture in the back with all of the men that were in the class, and they were holding up their hand because we were teaching them the hand model of the brain.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's so cool. And the stories that have come about from that, this experience every Wednesday is a mountaintop experience. I go every Wednesday for an hour and a half for the men and Fridays for the women. And the men, and the women too, but the men, it's almost like they're just starving for this. Like to hear the attachment cycle, to weigh in. We're on the correcting piece now. Yeah. And boy, we're diving deep into that because majority didn't come from the culture where we don't, it's not punitive. This is what we do. Yeah. And so the stories, I had a gentleman recently, one of the inmates, he said, I just want you to know that I believe if my family would have known about TBRI, I wouldn't be in jail today.
Wow.
Gold. Just gold. So,
this is being taught now. And one of the things you shared with me in Fort Worth is that there's even been the beginnings of a class for inmates who have life sentences, who are most likely not going to get out. Is that right?
Well, here's where I think it's rolling now, since you and I got that wonderful chance to visit in Fort Worth. We are looking at a few select inmates to become TBRI practitioners.
Okay.
Man. Which is just life-changing. And I'll elaborate on that in just a second. But I did want to say that yesterday when I was there with the men, there's one gentleman that he's so into all of this. And he came up and I was telling him again about the opportunity practitioner training. If you could have seen his face, he lit up and he said, do you mean I can be one of these people?
Yeah.
And I said, yes, you can be one of these people. So what we are looking at, and through collaboration with Amanda and Darren, they are coming to Shreveport in mid-May. And this group of men and women too, but they're only going to be here they'll be here on that Wednesday. They're going to have completed the 24 hours of caregiver training. And so they wanted certificates, and we're going to have a graduation ceremony.
Awesome.
And Darren hopefully is going to pass out those certificates. Yeah. And we're also, I was told yesterday by one of the law enforcement individuals there, Laura said, I get questions. She said, we have so many men that keep asking when you're going to start this class over again, and wanted to know the date. She said, they're so excited. They're asking me all the time, when does it start again? So these are moments I treasure. This is where the seeds of planting TBRI, showing up, being responsive to those that are underserved. You see such abundant fruit. And I am so excited about it. The idea that, and this is where the harbor hopefully will play in as well. If we are able to work it out for them to have training, a select few to have practitioner training inside the jail, I'm not sure how that's going to look right now, but when they get out, they would be able to come to a practitioner training, then my hope is that through Amanda and Darren will develop that like phase 2, where they are able to come to like the harbor, and we will have where they can bring in individuals that we have no way of reaching. Yeah. And I can continue to train it, but yet I'll have a co-trainer that has lived experience and can tell the stories. Like Amanda and I talked, I want TBRI in every correctional facility because I know it's working. It's making a difference. And I want a TBRI van. I keep mentioning this that says, TBRI. I just want to roll around the country and teach TBRI in the facilities. I do. Yeah.
So when the harbor opens, talk a little more about what will be happening inside of it, because I think this is, when we talk about creating systemic when we talk about generational trauma and systemic trauma and all these different cycles, it can get really overwhelming, and you can begin to feel helpless that, one person can't just interrupt all of these different things. And the change happens so slow, like, man, are we going to work our entire lives and only see one little thing change? But when we begin to think about these community centers and resources that can establish new normals in communities, then you can start to have effects on every level, on kids, adults, grandparents, can all be affected by this. So talk more about what the harbor is going to be, the services that will be offered there, all of that.
Thank you. I love the harbor. The vision of it is, as I said, it started as that thought of let's have a one-stop shop, understanding that, the intergenerational trauma cycle and how it's all working, that we've got to find a need or a way rather to meet our families at every point that we possibly can. And so when we have a family that would walk in off the streets, and first they're going to be embraced with respect, and they're see this beautiful, fresh new building and I'd like to go back and also talk a little bit more about the beginnings of the harbor. And maybe I'll pause that about what a family sees when they come in to add that the Caddo Parish School Board is actually gave this building to VYJ. They came in and gutted 55,000 square feet. We're still working on the second level to make this happen. And there was two huge grants, but in conjunction with the Caddo Parish School Board, there was an enormous grant that we were fortunate to have that allowed us to hire more people to do what we needed to do to meet those needs. So when you first walk into the harbor, now to paint that picture, literally, there is a beautiful, two-story mural that's on either side that tells the story of the VYJ mission. Children reaching for the stars, and just beautiful depiction. That Kelly hired a gentleman that painted a lot of our buildings downtown Shreveport to come in there and create this artwork. So, imagining for a moment a family walking in that is struggling, they may be hopeless, and now they come into this beautiful artwork and they have someone warmly welcoming them at the door.
Yeah.
And directing them for assessments where we'll be able to identify if they need counseling, or they may be coming to us, they need food. They don't even know how to apply for food stamps. They will have a social worker on staff. We'll have all these pieces in place. Right across the street is our Social Security office, where they can go and they can take care of all of those needs. So that's almost within walking distance. We're not even a block away from a Walmart one of the super centers. And so again, I don't know. I want to at times just put myself in that mental space, if I can, with a family that could have been struggling for years, decades. Right. And now they come into this place and they are going to know that they don't have to get back on a bus or pay a taxi to get them to counseling services, or we're actually going to have a physical therapist. We're going to have speech therapy. All of that is going to be there. And then a very large room is going to be a calming studio, where we're going to have this sensory rich room with bubble towers and interactive floor panels, and kind of like a family comes into a hope-filled Disney World, so to speak, where we don't want you leaving with that same spirit that you came in with. We want you to know we are here, and we are here to empower and to help you.
I love that. It sounds a lot like I shared with you when we were at TCU, the Memphis Family Connection Center, where ETC is based, where we have our offices here. Same thing. It's counseling, occupational therapy, speech therapy, services for families whose kids have experienced early trauma in life, and counseling for adults, kids, everybody. So the hope that it gave our family, even just as one who was able to receive, we were able to receive services from them, like understanding what a difference it made for our family. And in a lot of ways, our family stands in, opposition to others that experience cyclical generational trauma. We've had a lot of things stacked up in our favor. We were still struggling a ton as parents when we were seeing some challenges with some of our kids. And so I can't imagine then the feeling you would have of having that struggle on top of the other things stacked on top of that. And so to know that that's going to be there and accessible and near a bus station and Walmart and all the offices, And for you guys to be so interconnected within the systems and have knowledge of how to navigate those systems well makes a massive difference in this. So have there been things that you guys have seen? I know, I'm sure there's been lots of research being done, kind of keeping statistics as you go. Have you guys seen some things to show or signify like, well, we're moving the needle here? Like there's some things that are beginning to change in the city. And then I want to close by talking more about Judge Matlock and all of his time.
You know, I wish I love that about thinking, or I want to think that there's been a lot of like, I know people love to hear numbers and they like to hear, that this is changed. We had less children come back into care. We had less this or that. But from my perspective, I can tell stories after story of families that have said, I remember when I took your training, or I remember when Volunteers for Youth Justice, their CASA program brought Christmas gifts to my kids. And, all of these heartfelt stories that there's no way to put a number on it. There's really not a way to capture it other than in your heart and be able to, share it. I also at the harbor, we have our whole CASA staff, which is pretty large. It's housed there now. Our task staff housed there. I'll be doing biological parent trainings. I'm going to continue to do it by Zoom, but I'm also going to do walk-in trainings with the TBRI caregiver for families that need it, that wouldn't have come in through the court necessarily.
Yeah.
So I think to maybe better answer that question, or I don't know if I can better answer it, but just being in the momentum over the last decade, that to see that we've not stayed stagnant. We're not back in 2008. We're meeting that need. And that need is to provide services where a child that needs counseling, they're not waiting 3 months to get counseling. They can come in because the backlog for many of the services it's just that, it's backlogged.
Yeah.
And a child that's come into care, for instance, with trauma, they don't need to wait 3 months to be able to process what's going on. And we're going to be an immediate way, or in as much as possible, to be immediate, to be able to help that healing process start as early as we possibly can.
Man. I'm so excited for y'all in that. And I want to kind of wrap up today talking about Judge Matlock. And, one of the things that, and I heard this story from Darren Jones at TCU years ago, but Judge Matlock used to have a nickname because he's been a judge for a very long time, right? And his nickname used to be Judge Padlock because he would lock so many kids up, right? I've read the story. I've heard the story before. Would you kind of tell the story? You touched on it earlier, but of kind of the reputation that he had, and then the shift that's been made, and maybe some of the things that have been happening now in the lead up to his retirement.
And that retirement word, I hardly like to even say it nor hear it. It's going to be an enormous loss to the judicial system, quite frankly, everywhere. When I have heard him in court say, I used to be called Judge Matlock, I would lock up an 11-year-old for stealing candy in that kind of a moment. I think I didn't ever hear that. I wasn't sitting in court when that happened. When I first came on board as CASA, Judge Matlock was just making that a segue into hearing the child in need of care cases.
Yeah.
But I think what so defines watching that trauma lens is in these last specific, just for me, the specific 5 years when I've been in his courtroom every day, nearly, when it is open and he's holding court and got a docket, watching an individual that is humble and kind, respectful, and never ceasing to want to do what he feels like is the right thing. He calls on the CASAs, the attorneys, the TBRI advocates, everybody to help him with those decisions. And I have witnessed more times than I can count, there would maybe be a family or a parent, an offending parent, allegations thereof. They would be sitting in that courtroom, and judge has read everything. He knows what it brought all this into court, and he will ask them with the kindest, most respectful voice, is there anything else you would want me to know today?
Wow.
And what is he doing with that? He's letting a parent have a voice.
Yeah.
And, whether they're angry, which in all likelihood, yes, whatever might be going on, he holds space for them to be able to do that. And over the last number of years, when he has got such that trauma focused lens, we have water bottles, we have power bars, and JD, he will sometimes stop kind of in the middle. It'll be in the middle of a court case, and I'd hear him say, "Well, excuse me, does anybody need water? Or do you need a power bar?" And that's the kind of judge that if we, in my mind, if we could replicate Judge Matlock across our country, across our world, we would be seeing our families through a trauma-focused lens, knowing that this intergenerational trauma, it is there, and it's there 99% of the time that's there.
And he's in one of those seats that can often change course of that trauma in a family's life, right? Can either accelerate or slow it down. All right. For people who are listening to this and they're kind of wondering like, okay, but what kind of cases? So give us a typical case that he might be hearing. Like what might be a case that is in front of him to decide on?
He sees or hears all the child in need of care cases, the SINC cases. And he once did the math, just to give you a rough idea of this. If there were 450,000 children, for instance, that come into foster care in a year, he sees 0.1% of those in his courtroom. So that gives you a number of the vast cases that he would hear. And he would hear cases where, just maybe an example of a child who had witnessed seeing their baby brother drowned in a bathtub, and they laid eyes on that and they saw that kind of trauma, and the parents would be sitting in the courtroom, and he would listen to that story and have to make, well, to me as a layperson, having to make any of those hard decisions about, you've got families in there that are wanting to take and keep, I'm kind of really paraphrasing an actual case where there were two different sides of the family members, and they were embattled, and they all wanted this child to keep while the parents are working through a case plan. And clearly they have to go through so many, they have to do home checks on them, all sorts of things. But he would see cases of children that, quite frankly, had things I don't even almost want to put over the air, things that are just too horrible to think about, and have to make those decisions with the help of the attorneys and DCFS and CASAs and advocates and everybody weighing in on what is the best interest for this child, because they're I would hear him say, they're the star of the show. And we have times when Sasha, our emotional support puppy, that goes and sits in the courtroom and to bring comfort for that child. And he allows, in the middle of court, sometimes he say, "Sasha," and I'll snap her leash, and she'll go running and jump up on the bench. Because the reason I share that is because it's changing the energy in the courtroom, where it's deep and it's hard and it's difficult work. Everybody, like he once said, how can you kind of get a lot of anxiousness if there's a puppy in the courtroom? And just these things that he allows and he wants to see happen, from water bottles to power bars, to humble, kind, respectful to everyone in his courtroom, and to have a puppy that's in there. We have calming studios. He's, as you can probably hear it in my voice, he's up on that pedestal that if every judge could aim towards that, I think we'd see a difference in our world for sure.
Yeah. What is really hopeful about that is that the more that the statistics coming out of his courtroom, and are there ties that can be drawn to lower rates of recidivism or jumping back into that world again, maybe that is something that begins to catch on just as a best practice, not as some, hippie judge who's got a different way of doing things, but as somebody who is studying the data and studying the science and saying, this is actually the best case scenario for communities, is to look out for the long-term care of these families, of the caregivers, and of this child as well. And so my hope would be that we begin to see family courts around the country beginning to take on some of these same practices, knowing that the science is there to kind of back it up. And it's just really exciting stuff there. Listen, before we go, is there anything else that you want us to know today? Anything else that you want us to know about the work that's happening there, or for people who are wanting to get involved, what would be a good first step if somebody says, like, I want to start getting involved in some of this stuff? Where should they start out at?
I appreciate that, to be able to put a bow on it with that. I encourage you, do you want a calming studio? Do you want an advocate program? Do you want to go into the jail? What is it that you find that moment that's going to fuel your passion? Begin where you are. If it's a lava lamp, and as Judge Matlock laughed, a sack of oranges and a bottle of water and a lava lamp, start your calming studio. Don't wait until you get a $65,000 grant to start it. It just bloom where you're planted, I think. And if you have opportunity and you're that practitioner and you have a heart to go in and train inmates, get with your jail, get with your judge, because Judge Matlock clearly was able to help move that needle as well. Yeah. And if you want an advocate program, reach out. I'll be glad to talk to you about what does that look like. And I just want to see that transformational moment. And I know if we all gather together as that village that we know it takes, and we start where we are, don't wait until you got all the things in place, because I can assure you from my perspective, all the things won't get into place. Go ahead and just begin and allow it to organically evolve according to what works in your, for what you are hoping to do. So just start.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good word. Lucinda, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me. Thanks, JD.
Well, just a huge thank you to Lucinda. And again, you can follow the links in our show notes to learn more about Volunteers for Youth Justice and Lucinda's work down there. Just fascinating stuff. Really excited about that, and hopeful that the work happening in Shreveport can begin to go all over the country. How awesome would it be to have trauma-informed courtrooms all through the juvenile justice system across our country? Could change generations of families and communities in our country. So we'll be hopeful for that. Huge thanks again to Lucinda for coming on. A big thanks to Kyle Wright, who edits and engineers all of our audio, and to Tad Jewett, the creator of the music behind the Empowered to Connect podcast. For everybody here at ETC, I'm JD Wilson, and we will see you next week on the Empowered to Connect podcast.